Yeah, greetings, my people. Welcome to Anorock TV, and we're there with you again. Yeah, Fabianstennett, your host, here live on Anorock TV, and we want to start about the slave trade today, the institution of slavery. The earliest period of the civilized world found slavery existing as an economic system which functioned by the selling of humans to become the chattel property of society. Slavery exists in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and in the early Christian church, which did not frown at it, nor repudiated its unmerciful transaction. During the 5th to the 8th centuries, 500 to 800 AD, priests and churches officially retained slaves, and it was not until the period 900 to 1300 AD that there was a decline in the violation. In process of times, its historical progression resulted in its revival. Early in the 16th century, the colonizing effort and dogma of Spain and Portugal were opened up in the New World to the detriment of the Dutch, the French, and the English in trading in the Eastern Hemisphere, where their exclusion resulted into an open warfare against the Spanish. The colonizing effort of English sea roving infiltrators, John Hawkins, Francis Drake, and Sir Walter Raleigh, allowed no other alternative but to wage an unceasing warfare against Spain based on the following motive: to found and establish colonies in the New World, to gain geographical knowledge of the new land, and worse, to suppress the Catholic Church. Colonizers who were sent out by Sir Walter Raleigh into the northern American mainland returned to England with the indigenous product of potatoes and tobaccos, which were not indigenous to England, became agricultural novelties to the English countryside. Francis Drake, the English sea dog, circumnavigated the world and found new sea route, but it was John Hawkins who, by his insistence on the Spaniard, established a lucrative commercial monopoly of the negro slave trade, with the Spanish colony in the New World, and its commercialization was ratified by the signing of the ancient with Spain. It was a commercial license to buy, barter, and to catch negroes in Africa and to sell them to the Spanish colonies and to some extent to the Portuguese in the New World. The defeat of the invincible Spanish Armada in 1588 by Britain shattered Spain's naval and commercial supremacy in the New World, which resulted in permanent disruption to Spain's infiltration and maritime supremacy in the Western Hemisphere. Subsequently, 90 years afterward, the viable Second Peace Treaty of Madrid in 1670 unlocked the lucrative Middle Passage slave trade route, coursing itself between West Africa and the eastern seaboard of North America down through Mexico into the islands of the Caribbean. Slave trade continued to Brazil and to the South American continent, where tobacco, the indigenous herb of the New World, became a basic crop along with cotton, sugarcane, and coffee, which were supplied in abundance to the European markets. For nearly 100 years, between 1670 to 1750, the British socio-economic life of Jamaica was in a state of languor, but the inception of the Industrial Revolution in Europe found a link in the application of machines to do some of the manual tasks, although slave labor was vitally indispensable to the sugarcane industry, which enhanced the demand and supply to meet the English markets, resulting in a reciprocal trade system. From Senegal to Angola and to the west coast of Africa, different African tribes were herded into slave ships designated by the name slavers, into which in nearly all the circumstances were berthed at Port Caramanti to receive the Africans who were herded into captivity. The tribes included the Mandingos, Fantas, Ashantis, Ibus, also spelled Ebos, Waidas, Yorubas, Cross, each tribe having a particular and a signal type of behavioral pattern. Various methods were used to muster and to abduct the slaves. A common method was kidnapping during the night when villages were attacked and raided, but the inducive system of barter was the most alluring and bewitching method which was used on the African in his own land. The barter system, as it had its psychological influences, and the West African commercial lifestyle, which in its sociological patterns have left Afro-West Indian with a European paternal name to which he is paternally unrelated. Jamaica's heritage, therefore bridged to the past with heroic sacrifice, is replete with the fact there is no race of man who has not undergone sacrifices to make us positively what we are, for we were bought with a price. The slave trade and the Migra Passage, one of the most incomparable socio-economic infiltration into the New World, was the slave trade, which continued from the late 15th to the early 19th century. Its most pronounced disruptive effects were its intrusion into Africa, particularly, and the western coastal fringes. Originated by Portuguese and Spanish nations during the 15th century, and subsequently by the British, the Dutch, and the French, it functioned as a diplomatic perpetration which was entrenched in the signing of the Asiento, an agreement between Spain and England in 1518, by which English slave traders agreed to purchase the and cargo and to dispose of them at ports in the British West Indies and North American colonies. The journey from the West African coastline to the port in the West Indies was a hazardous one which lasted 2 or more months, and disembarking the cargo of slaves in the West Indies and at specified ports in the eastern North America, the slavers laden with sugar, rum, indigo, tobacco, cotton, and money, the profit from the sale of slaves in the West Indies sailed with the profits to be lodged in English and European banks. The ordeal of banking expedited the ships continued from England and Western Europe to Africa, which, with their cache of arms, ammunition, and trinkets, which were highly prized for their defensive and alluring values respectively. Whenever captured, the slaves were securely yoked and chained for days and for weeks. They trekked the tiresome journey to the barracoons, the slave trading ports of the African slave coast, where the human cargoes were firmly packed and transferred into slave ships to be transported to the New World. The conditions under which they traveled were insanitary, unbearable, and brutally heinous, conditions responsible for the outbreak of contagious diseases which were rampant on the voyage. Mortality rate was high, and dysentery resulted from the contaminated water and food which were used during the voyage and which many did not survive. The blinding disease of ophthalmia was also prevalent in many of the prospective slaves and in future, and it became a score and the sugar estate. At the port of entry, the cargo of slaves receive a brushing up, then clean up the slave them, hire them up, groom them up, and the slaver's arrival in the West Indies, glowing advertisement relative to the quality of specific individual or tribes were exhibited by placards or poster which informed the purchasers of the number of slaves for sale, their age, and their tribal origin. So then go in Africa, pick up the people, them like goods me people. And then put price tag on them like when you go buy flour and rice and have them a sell. Yes, and that John Hawkins and William Hawkins do. The majority of slaves were the Caramanti who came from West Africa. They were an all-inclusive tribe who embarked on the perilous slave journey from Port Caramanti, their tribal features varying and retaining their reputable tribal traits and mannerism. From Nigeria, now named Ghana, the Iroquois reputable Ashantis originated along the Gold Coast, distinguished for their renowned boldness and their abstinency in offering a challenge and satisfyingly accepting the response to prove their physical valor. In 1760, one of the earliest recorded belligerent feats by the Caramantis in Jamaica occurred, led by Taki, the reputable Ashanti ringleader in the parish of St. Mary. He was resolutely bold enough to offer a challenge which led to his death and the decapitation of his head, which was hoisted in the Spanish town square to frighten off other obstinate tribal rebel leaders, among which the Ashanti tribe was the most famous. Pawapas tribe, also spelled Papawas, originated from the coast of Dahomey. Respected for their keenness in hard work, they gained great reputation and popularity for their speculative valor. They were docile, and that quality in many circumstances made them submissive. Another tribe, the Ibo, also spelled Eboe, was traditionally from the Bight of Benin and the estuary of the Niger River, also offer fairly good market price and were also docile to the point of seduction and enticement. And examining the tribal communities, the Ashantis were mentally energetic, physically robust, vigorously hardy, and accurately discriminative in their eyesight. Their spirit of heroism and independence has given to Jamaica the unbrandished culture of Maroon Town, Fury Town, Trelawney Town of St. James, and Nanny, Jamaica, only national heroine, and Sam Sharp, the freedom fighter, prejudiced to be of Ashanti temperament. Let me repeat, and examining the tribal communities, the Ashantis were mentally energetic, physically robust, vigorously hardy, and accurately discriminative in their eyesight. Their spirit of heroism and independence have given to Jamaica the unbrandished culture of the Maroon, Fury/Trelawney Town of St. James, and Nanny, Jamaica only national heroine, and Sam Sharp, the freedom fighters, prejudiced to be of Ashanti temperament. One must also note along this line that although Sam Sharp and Paul Bogle participated in fighting against the British, they too owned up to 20 black slaves, and in the beginning of their campaign, they were conducting their slave business as per usual until the so-called English supremacy refused to pay them, hence they returned to the people of the Maroon to ask them to help them. That I will take up and deal with on another presentation, or should I say in another presentation. Steeped in the cultural element of the Ashanti religion, Nanny and Kojo were uncompromisingly persistent in instilling into their fellow men the element of their Ashanti religion, which became the art and which Sam Sharp compiled his faggots to light the torch of slave rebellion of 18 1831 to 1832. During the heyday of slavery, there were 5 slave markets in Jamaica, quartered in Port Royal, Kingston, Port Antonian, Lucy and Montego Bay. These depots were generally termed slave rings, which were in the open air under the heat of the blazing sun. One must also note, in Montego Bay, Upper Union Street, right in front of Overton Plaza, they will build one church there right now. That is where the slave ring used to be in Montego Bay. So let me go again. During the heyday of slavery, there were 5 slave markets in Jamaica, quartered in Port Royal, Kingston, Port Antonian, Lucy and Montego Bay. These depots were generally termed slave rings, which were in the open air under the heat of the blazing sun, but for the offered shade the flamboyance of the legendary cotton tree or the Siba Penchanda, where the newly arrived slaves were sold to become the absolute possession of a slave master, and where the human cargo was given no personal redress. The traditional slave market in Montego Bay was held under the shade of a cotton tree which served for that purpose along the northern side of the Cul-de-Sac East Street. For more than 200 years, it was a cultural landmark identified by the Jamaican National Heritage Trust to be a notable point of historical importance. It heard the auction calls of the slave market. The following verse makes a clever description. The slave market cotton tree. By the roadside you found me, children of Africa, the motherland. Pull ashore, they brought me, neath the flaming tropic sun. There you found me, a shady nook, to start to learn a lesson deep from a new book. In the Montego Bay town, the massive and aged cotton tree fell to the ground nearly 4 years ago. And that was like 1989, 88. John Taylor, one of Jamaica's earliest historians, portrayed in his book, Writing from Port Royal, a record of the life of a newly arrived slave on a Jamaica sugar plantation. His anecdote read, when a planter had purchased some 20, 30 or more Negro slaves, he first give each man a wife, without which they will not be content to work. Then he gives to each man his wife an half acre to plant for themselves maize, potato, yam, which land they planted in their leisure hours. A slave, as soon as he was purchased, became the property of slave master and was taken to the sugar estate of the purchasers, and there he was securely chained. Subsequently, the inhumane rite of branding commenced. An iron branding stamp, which bore the lettered marks or initial of his purchaser, was used to commence the initiation or deal, which the slave was compelled to accept, and promptly he became or she became the ward of an experienced and trustworthy slaves, whose duty was to expose him or her to a period of conditioning to the life on the slave plantation. Structured in 4 main social gradients, the slave society consists of whites, free blacks, colored, and blacks. Clustering several and different groups of slaves, the free slaves was the largest and the most important group, while other groups were delegated to a variety of tasks which were geared to the age and sex of the particular group. The life of a slave and the sugar plantation was a nostalgic experience. Consequently, truancy was pronounced, the slaves finding the serenity of the woods a compensative satisfaction, which fostered the growth of runaway slaves, who on numerous occasions frequented the sugar plantation to pillage it or to participate in slave uprising or revolt. On the outbreak of the slave rebellion of 1831, many slaves who might have experienced the horrors of the Middle Passage, which ended in 1806, participated as a marauding rebels and sugar estate, taking their spies to mountainous recesses away from their African homeland, where they enjoy unlimited freedom of movement. The slave became new wine in old bottle. This is Fabianstennett presenting the slave trade on Anorock TV. Please remember to like, subscribe, follow, and share. Catch you next time.